everyone, and welcome to the Savage NASCAR Podcast, first episode of 2023. And I'm here with a very special guest, Chris Wilner. Thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm very excited for this interview. You know, you're one of the people that I've been wanting to get on the show for a while. I mean, you're very talented with all that you do media-wise. So you do a lot. I mean, you're from NASCAR Motor Racing Network. You do things with IMSA, Flow Racing, Millbridge, and there's a lot of that we'll get into as we go along in this video. So, however, the first thing that I want to ask you is a question I ask all the guests that come on the show, and that is, where did you find your interest in the sport of racing?
So I grew up in Indianapolis, and obviously anybody in racing knows that is the mecca, aside from obviously Daytona, for auto racing. And you basically, growing up through school, learn the winners of the Indy 500 before you actually learn your multiplications tables. So that's how serious everybody takes it in Indy. And so I had been going to the track with my parents for a while just as a fan. And I kind of was wondering, how could I do this? I don't come from a racing background. My mom's a doctor and my dad worked in sales for many years. So we didn't really understand how to do that. And it was funny, who's now my best friend, Dylan Welch. I heard his father on the radio because they both, they're from Indy as well. And he was talking in a local station in Indianapolis saying, oh, my son Dylan finished second in his junior Honda quarter midget race here. And I said, wait a minute, hold on. Dad, call the radio station, get Vince on the phone. Let me ask him how his son does this. So one thing led to another, and we ended up getting in contact with Vince and meeting him and Dylan down at the racetrack there at the fairgrounds in Indy called Mini Indy Speedway. And I'll never forget, Vince picked me up. I was about, 7 years old, 8 years old at the time. He picked me up over the fence, and I watched Dylan take some practice laps. He gets off the track, and we realized we went to the same elementary school.
Wow.
And we became best friends ever since. And so that they kind of helped my dad kind of find a used car somebody was selling at the racetrack, and we bought a little trailer that we kept in our neighborhood at my house and started to go racing. So that's kind of where the passion for racing came in. It started as a driver at first, but obviously just like a lot of stories of folks in the media that started out in racing, they realized how quickly expensive that's going to be. So I figured, what's the next best thing to do that'll still get me to the racetrack, and broadcast journalism is what it was.
That's awesome. And you actually work with Dylan, and y'all going to be working together in the High Limit series, if I'm correct, later on this year. So that's really cool. Now, you went to Syracuse for a couple of years. And can you tell me a little bit about how you got your start in the media industry?
Yeah, so Syracuse has one of the best, if not the best, journalism program. I'm biased, I'll say it has the best, but I think there's plenty of schools that have really good quality journalism programs. But Syracuse, was my choice, not only for the school, but for the fact of that journalism program. You look at the likes of Bob Costas and Mike Tirico that have come out of that program. So I said, well, if I'm going to study, I'd like to go to the place that's known for sports broadcast journalism. So Syracuse is what it was. And while I was there, I did everything student run related in terms of TV and radio, had my own radio show. I did broadcast reporting for Syracuse basketball, got to go to a Final Four, so you do a lot of unique events, and you learn a lot of those traits that are going to translate to your real world profession. While I was at Syracuse, I was still living in Indy, obviously with my parents. And one summer I interned at the local station in Indy, Wish TV, with Anthony Calhoun, who was still there, Syracuse grad. And I got to cover the Indy 500, the Pacers, the Colts, and built up a demo reel of some of my material from that experience. And that's actually, when I put that together, what landed my first job, just sending out resumes and tapes to any local station that would have me upon graduation. And within 2 weeks, I got a call from Abilene, Texas. Never heard of it until they called me. And it's about 2 hours outside Dallas. They said, you want to come be our sports guy? I said, sure. And packed up and went, and off she went.
That's fantastic. Now, you actually won an award for a story you did in San Angelo. Is that correct? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was the story was shot in San Angelo. It was for that station in Abilene, Texas. Okay. It was a story about a golfer. Her name was Hadley, and she had cancer that they discovered during her early developmental days as a youth softball player. And luckily, it saved her life. Her coach actually was the one who noticed it. And so it was kind of the story about her recovery and how she then turned to golf because she can't play contact sports because of that injury that was caused by the tumor in her neck. And so now she plays golf, and she ended up winning a state title and basically became, one of the best golfers in her area. So one of the unique stories, as folks that maybe are familiar with the local news element, we're out to, we're not covering necessarily NASCAR all the time or the NFL. You're looking at local sports. And so I'm a big storyteller. I love to go find those unique stories of somebody overcoming either an illness or a tragedy. And so that was an opportunity to tell her story. And luckily I sent it in and it won a Texas AP award.
That's great, man. And, you were from Indiana. You went there, then you went to Syracuse, then to Texas, and now North Carolina. And not only have you done reporting, you've done video work, editing, stuff like that. So you started, if I'm correct, did you get into so you started with NASCAR Productions, is that correct, before you went to MRN? And you started doing video for them?
Yeah. So it was kind of one of those things where, I needed to have a job to move. I wasn't about to move to Charlotte with nothing and try to make something happen. So a friend of a friend got me in contact with Keith Alessandro, who's the senior producer out there at NASCAR Productions, does IMSA and kind of oversees that digital side. And he reached out and said, listen, I only got about maybe 30 confirmed days throughout the whole year for you to come in and freelance edit. But I know from your local news background, you can put something together pretty quickly. And I've used that software before. So I said, okay. So I started with NASCAR Productions in March of 2019 when I moved to the Charlotte area. And I still keep with it every once in a while. If I've got time during the week, if I'm not if I'm not traveling that weekend, I usually pencil in some days to help out the IMSA team do elements for the broadcast. So if you watch an IMSA race, let's say the Rolex 24 last month at Daytona, there'll be some elements coming out of break, or there'll maybe be a feature. I probably had a hand in putting that together. Awesome. So it kind of keeps my editing skills sharp, because you never know what life is going to throw at you, and who knows how long I'll last in this industry on the on-air side. So I'd like to at least keep that editing, skill set pretty sharp, just in case, it's ever needed.
That's great. And, you have many talents. I mean, as we mentioned, the reporting, the announcing, journalism, and editing. Now, I want to backtrack a little bit. This is just a question from because I've never been, but the Indianapolis 500, could you describe the spectacle of the event?
I mean, it's the greatest event in the world, and I have no problem saying that compared to the Daytona 500 or any of the well, I mean, I haven't been to the Super Bowl, but in terms of motorsports, to me, it's the greatest event because it granted was shortened a little bit over recent years from a full month, but it's truly a month spectacle. And living in Indiana for the first 18, 19 years of my life, when May 1st rolled around, you could feel the energy in the city. There was all kinds of events. Drivers would be out and about. And then obviously when it got to the on-track element, the energy would just ramp up from opening practice all the way through pole day, all the way through carb day and the final practice and the pit stop competition and the concerts to, of course, race day, which, for me starts at 6 a.m. every year. I still go. I have only missed, I think, 4 races since 2001.
Wow.
So I try to go if my schedule allows every year. A goal of mine is to work that event in some capacity. But until then, I'll be going as a fan. And it's just incredible. The amount of people that's packed in that place, the pageantry between, the balloon release and the 21 gun salute and taps and back home again in Indiana. And it brings a tear to my eye every year. And yeah, okay, it's maybe because I'm also from Indiana, but trust me, you go once, and my wife can attest to this. She knew nothing about racing. I met her in Texas, actually, at the station I worked at, brought her to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway for the first time in 2016, the 100th anniversary, and she's now hooked, and we plan on going every year. So it's one of those things where if you watch it on TV does a great job, but you need to go in person. It's truly spectacular.
Yeah, I mean, for just the description, and not only that, just seeing it, I could only imagine. I've been to the 500. I've never been to the Super Bowl, but the Indy 500 is definitely on my bucket list. Now, you just mentioned wife. You actually got married 6 months ago. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it's 6 months flies by. I guess what they say, time flies when you're having fun. So yeah, still married, so we're all good there. But yeah, I'm glad she puts up with my crazy work schedule and is pretty supportive about it.
Yeah, and you travel a lot too. I mean, you're on the road like almost every week of the year. You were at NASCAR Productions and you end up getting an audition to Motor Racing Network in 2019, if I'm correct. Could you tell me like about your start in Motor Racing Network and how that all came about?
Yeah. So, obviously at the time, Dylan, we've been friends ever since our quarter midget
Mhm.
days. And he kind of blazed the trail and went to Charlotte a little bit before I did a few years and got his audition with MRN. So I kind of been in contact with him. And he was the one who really said, Chris, if you want to do motorsports, which I know you do, you probably just need to move down here and because this is where it's at, and I said, okay. So that's what kind of got me to go to Charlotte and
Mhm.
hook up with NASCAR Productions. Well, then during that time, I'd been reaching out to MRN almost constantly, being like, hey, I'm in town. I'd love to audition. I understand that, you guys have a process. And they said it just worked out. They said, hey, we've got the truck race in Charlotte, Coke 600 weekend in May. Why don't you come out, during qualifying, and we'll basically do a audition, fake race audition during their qualifying session. We'll just kind of see how you do. I said, great. So I showed up, and, back then we had the blue truck in the infield, the iconic blue MRN truck that everybody works out of, getting to meet guys like Dave Moody and Mike Bagley for the first time that I've listened to on the radio, for as long as I can remember when I'd have NASCAR on the radio. And it was really surreal to be a part of that. And so I did a few hits for them. They kind of fake tossed it to me like it was during a race, but it was during qualifying, and talked to a couple drivers. I think my first ever interview was Stephen Parsons. And so I still tell him that when I see him on the Xfinity schedule, I said, you'll forever be my first professional NASCAR interview. But anyways, so yeah, it kind of went well, and, stayed in contact, and they said, okay, we actually have an opening for a turn announcer position at Road America later in the year. I guess somebody was sick or they needed an extra hand. So that was my first official race, was the Xfinity race at Road America in 2019. And then after that, they just kind of slowly build up your schedule. Once you kind of prove yourself, then I got some pit road opportunities the following year. I think I did like 4 or 5 races, mostly truck races, maybe a couple Xfinity. And then after that, it kind of builds to where now, I do cup races plus trucks and Xfinity. And the goal is to do as many races as I can.
That's awesome. And it's a great story. Now, Stephen Parsons is a really nice guy. I remember I ran into him at Wilkesboro for the Cars Tour event. I was just walking up the road and I saw him. I think I was talking to Bob Pockris, and all of a sudden Parsons just walks up next to us and he's like, hey, just gave like a pat on the back to Bob. I was like, oh. But anyways, this is a random story. So with going on the road and traveling and all the races and events you go to, is there like a favorite stop on the schedule other than Indianapolis?
Yeah, well, luckily this year with IMSA going to Indy for the first time since 2014, that'll officially, of course, be my favorite. But aside from that, going to work the PA there for them. But I would say on the NASCAR side, I've always loved Road America. And obviously, I know now this year with the Chicago Street Race, it's only an Xfinity event. Doesn't matter. One of my favorite racetracks to go to. It is so picturesque. The food, probably one of the best track food stops on the schedule. I know a lot of people love the Martinsville hot dog. I get it. It's wonderful. But overall, the amount of selection and the cheese curds and all that, the grilled cheese, the dairy, selection, I mean, it's great. So I'd say Road America on the NASCAR side, or I really like the trip out to Vegas, which I'm about to go to. Obviously, it's short for us for MRN because we just do the Truck Series race. PRN covers the Xfinity and Cup races out there. But I always love that city. I mean, it's such a cool vibe because you're like in Sin City and all of a sudden a race breaks out, but you've got a party, down on the strip. So that's fun. On the IMSA side, I really like the West Coast trips with Long Beach and Laguna Seca. If you have never been to Laguna Seca, go. The corkscrew is even more intense in person than what you watch on TV. The like 10-story drop between 8A and 8B is insane.
Yeah.
So you definitely have to check that out. So I say those are probably I know that's not really one, but those are my handful of favorite tracks.
Those are great selections. Road America it's a big place, but I wish that it stayed on the Cup schedule. I know they first ran their back, I want to say late 50s or early 60s. And one thing that I found interesting while I was reading about it was that the lap times were like 8 minutes because of the cars, and that they
Yeah.
were getting used to the track. But yeah, it's sad to see it off the Cup schedule. I wonder, Chicago. I've talked with a lot of people about how the Chicago Street Course race is going to go. It's the corners are very narrow, so I wonder how they're going to maneuver through all this. It's definitely going to be one that a lot of people are going to be watching just to see, is this going to go right or wrong?
Yeah, it's one of those things where, the technology we have now with iRacing, I don't know, you're on iRacing, but I've got my little rig back here. It's not much, but I like to get on it. But it's really cool that we can use that tool to simulate what it would be like before we actually get there. Because, if this was 10, 15 years ago and you decided we're going to throw a street course race at Chicago, literally the only chance you're going to test is that weekend when the track is built. And it could go wrong, and then what? You're out of luck. So at least we tried it before. It seemed to work. Obviously, I think everybody's just excited to see something new, and it'll be bizarre. I've got family in the Chicago area, and I've been down, Lakeshore Drive and all that many, many times, and I can't imagine what a Cup car is going to look like. So I'm a little jealous of my colleagues that are going to take on that race for MRN. I would love to have been there, but it'll be fun to watch and cover from that while I'm up in Road America in the next couple weeks.
Awesome. Now, speaking of online racing, if I'm correct, you worked a little bit with NASCAR Heat a couple of years ago. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Because I'm not too familiar with the online gaming.
Yeah, so it was obviously growing up, I played NASCAR Thunder, 2002, 2004 on the PlayStation, and NASCAR Productions in 2019 took on the venture to have, something similar to what the iRacing community has with the eNASCAR Coca-Cola iRacing series, but do it for the, PlayStation and Xbox community. They wanted to have a series, a league that's broadcasted, but that's not iRacing. So NASCAR took it on, NASCAR Production, I should say, in 2019. And again, perfect, right place, right time. I was just starting my little editing journey, and Keith Alessandro knew that I was an on-air person. So he gave me a shot to host it with Hannah Newhouse, who does stuff, on TV and in DIRTVision. So that's where we met. And her and Dylan were actually just started dating at the time. So full circle, how we all meet each other. But yeah, so for a year, they took on that series. And so we had, I think it was like 12 races or something like that. And so I would be in the NASCAR production studio. They do a lot of remote work. So some of the IMSA races during COVID and NASCAR were actually done in that Charlotte studio. But it made it look like you were at the racetrack. So we would call it like a real NASCAR race. I was in the same booth, and we were, doing play-by-play. We'd have segments with some of the drivers, via Zoom or their, webcams. And it was really cool. It was the first of its kind on the console side. And then we actually had an in-studio in Studio 43 downtown in Charlotte, where all the drivers came out, and we had rigs set up, and they were able to play against each other in the championship race. And we had a crowd, and it was really cool. We had Chad Knaus come in and was our guest analyst. So that was cool just to, hang out with him and have him be a part of the broadcast. So yeah, we did that for a year. And then, obviously 2020 COVID happened, and NASCAR Productions went in a different direction. So that series went on to like Speed 51 and things like that. So, and then I don't know where it's at now, but it was at least cool to do it for a year. And I got to broadcast a couple iRaces since then. But I like doing both, broadcasting on iRacing, but I like driving. I'm not that good, but it's fun to try some of these disciplines and, keep fresh in the seat for when I ever get back driving again.
That's great. Now, you mentioned DIRTVision. You work races at Millbridge every once in a while for DIRTVision. Sometimes I'm on the other end. I'm in the studio doing the Millbridge races. So could you tell me about how you got started with announcing at Millbridge and I guess some fun experiences you've had there?
Yeah, I mean, it's another thing of building up the resume, right? Like, so if you kind of go back to 2019, it's okay. I have, my NASCAR production days. Again, that's not going to pay the bills. I was sleeping on Dylan's couch, in his apartment. He had an extra bedroom. So I was able to kind of like save money that way. But I'm like, okay, I need to start getting going here. So I had the MRN audition. That went great. Okay, I only have one race. All right, what else can I do? Well, there's Millbridge Speedway, and they just launched their micro program as a part of their, because it's always been an outlaw kart track, a great facility, but they since added micros and said, well, that's what I used to race. I know that stuff inside and out. Reached out to Ashley Burnett and Jeremy, who own Millbridge Speedway up in Salisbury, and they're like, sure, we actually need a guy to fill in, today. Can you come up? Yeah, sure. Did it. And it just kind of been like, all right, cool. You want to be our Wednesday guy? And because that's they race micros on Wednesdays, and then they have their Tuesday program for kids that now our own Steve Post on MRN does as well. But yeah, me and Casey LaJoy, Corey's brother, broadcast the Wednesday nights, have for the last couple of years. We'll do it again this year on DIRTVision for the micro slate. I may throw in some Saturdays if I have free time. There are some Wednesdays I can't make just because of other commitments, whether it's travel for MRN or IMSA, or now the high limit series that I'm doing for Flow Racing this year. So there may be some conflicts, but it's a nice Wednesday night thing I know I can do and be up at a dirt track, which is, where I got started. So it's nice to have that amidst all the chaos of the rest of the week.
Definitely. Now, Millbridge is a very fun track. Like, I went there in person late last year during World Finals, and it was very cool to see in person. And have you ever turned any laps around the track?
That's funny you say that. Not yet. So, over the last year or so, Dylan's run, I think, twice or three times just for one-off deals, just trying to race whenever he can. And I've always had the itch to get back in the seat because I ran the Tulsa Shootout as a micro driver. I used to run micros full time, when I lived in Indy. And I've always wanted, my perfect situation would be to do 3 or 4 races during the year that fit with my schedule and then be able to go back to Tulsa and give it another shot. And so Dylan and I were talking, over the off season this past year. And he was like, the 2 cars you used to race are literally sitting in a barn in Indiana doing nothing. So I've been playing phone tag with the car owner, George Estep. And so we're trying to get a deal to where we can go pick up the cars, bring them down here. Dylan just bought a house last year and he's building a little shop. So we're going to keep them there and then just play around with them. So the plan is at some point this year, I'm going to turn some laps, whether it's just practice or maybe a race event. So sorry, Ashley, you may lose your announcer for a week, but we'll see what happens. But yeah, the goal for me would be to do that. Obviously, it's easier if somebody has a car down here that would let me play around for a day. That'd be awesome. I still have all my race gear. So we'll see. But the plan is at some point to turn some laps, because every time I announce the micros, I'm just like, oh man, get me out there. I'd love to try it.
Epic. Now, during the winter, you actually, if I'm correct, you went to the Chili Bowl. Is that correct? I know there's a lot of entries this year and a lot of crazy action. What is it like in person at such a small track, but with all those cars just maneuvering? It's so crazy to see.
Yeah, it's the most chaotic race, but it's probably my favorite race that's not on the NASCAR or IMSA schedule. It's something I look forward to, especially because it's literally the only thing going on. It's second week of January. Everybody else is snowed in across the country. People pick up. They've got 350 entries plus of midgets. And it's been cool the last couple of years to not only have gone as a fan for the first time several years ago, but then now to have worked the broadcast and be a part of the broadcast team on Flow for the last few years. And so it's unique for sure. I mean, they literally think of a fairgrounds expo center that they put a dirt track in, build some grandstands, and they sell out the place each and every year. And it's cool because it's a party. It's a party, but a race breaks out because there's people that are in the pits that may not even go sit in the stands and watch, but they've got the video boards, but they hang out. And it's the who's who of racing, because we've seen over the last several years, you got Connor Daly from the IndyCar series. You've got Santino Ferrucci from IndyCar. You've got NHRA drag racers like Cruz Pendragon, who's raced. And then obviously NASCAR stars, Chase Briscoe, Chase Elliott ran a couple years ago, Kyle Larson, Alex Bowman, you name it. So it's really cool because you don't just get the stars of the USAC or the Sprint Car Series that do it, but then you get these no names on NASCAR and IndyCar and other discipline side. So it's really cool. Again, kind of like the Indy 500, if you haven't gone, put that on your schedule. There's not anything going on in January, so you might as well come up after New Year's and come hang out with us in Tulsa. I literally spend 2 weeks in Tulsa between the shootout, which is the micro version of the Chili Bowl, and then I come home for 3 or 4 days, then go back for another week. So It's crazy. I feel like I should have an Oklahoma driver's license by the time I'm in January, because I feel like I've spent so much time there.
What's some of the takeaways and some things you've learned from working in media?
Well, probably the biggest thing is to stay humble. Everything happens for a reason. Everybody likes to have a timetable of where they'd like to be, what they'd like to do. But even some talented people, it never pans out or it doesn't happen the way you want to. So stay humble and take every opportunity that's presented to you, no matter how big or how small. When I first started even working with MRN, I was taking gigs with, some lower budgeted, streaming services to go do kart racing on Thanksgiving in Georgia or out in Mississippi, something like that. Just something to keep your name out there, keep your face out there. And I'm still trying to do that to this day. You mentioned the network gig I did with NBC. That was one race. And as well as it went, and as much as, I thought I did such a good job and it was kind of a door opening to future opportunities, nothing's happened yet. And that's okay, but you have to keep doing what you can do. So if you want to be in this business, it's not, oh, I got this gig and I'm set. And you always got to find the next thing and make sure your calendar's filled up no matter how big. And that's why, I have IMSA and MRN and Flow Racing and DIRTVision and all that stuff, just because I need to keep doing stuff to keep myself out there and polished. So it's probably the biggest thing I've learned. And then just, having a support system around you, whether that's family, friends, a wife or girlfriend, because you don't have a normal job. We have a fun job, but at the same time, it's stressful and it could get hectic. So having a support system that believes in you and then for yourself, just to take every opportunity and knock down doors, email folks, reach out to people, use your network of people you meet to figure out what's coming up. It may not be immediate, but you know what? Like some of the deals I've gotten have just been, oh, I remember you from last year. And, I thought about you just yesterday. Let me give you a shot. So you never know what could happen. So just always be on your toes.
That's some great advice. And, you've been in the media industry now for about 10 years, if I'm correct. And as we've mentioned, you have many different skills. Has there been anyone that you looked up to or inspired you as you began your career?
Yeah, I would say, early on when I was young, especially going through middle school and high school, because I was blessed to have an education where our high school had our own TV station and we had our own radio station, and we were able to produce and broadcast high school football from our school. So while I was doing that, which was my first real introduction to this business, it would be our local sportscaster in town, Anthony Calhoun, who I had the pleasure of interning with and is a dear friend of mine. I always looked up to him just for the way he was able to network and his poise on air and how professional he was. And then when I looked at motorsports, it was Dylan's dad, Vince, and not just for the fact because I knew him, but I knew who Vince Welch was well before I met him. And I always thought he was one of the best on TV, still is. And now I get to work with the guy for the Highland Series, which I think is so cool, just for that full circle moment, because he's been somebody I had to reach out to early on in my career just about where to start and who to talk to, and had him look at my demo reels and say, what am I doing wrong? What should I focus on more? And yeah, so I'd say those two individuals for sure. Obviously, you look at the legendary broadcasters, both on radio when it was Barney Hall. Nobody will beat Barney Hall on radio. One of the most iconic voices of all time. Reporters, Chris Economaki, Tom Carnegie on the PA has been my all-time favorite at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. There's a list of names in every industry, but I would say the ones I've listed are ones that stick out in my mind that I've paid attention to.
Gotcha. Goals that you may have this year.
Well, the first is to not get fired. So do a good job with all the different elements and the different races I get to cover. I don't know. I'd say the biggest goal of mine is to just keep progressing, whether that's just in terms of the quality of my work or, changing the way I prepare just to make sure I'm doing the best I can. In terms of looking ahead, obviously I'd love to get back, onto network television in any capacity. I've said I'll do NHRA, Supercross, and not even anything with a motor. I got my start in local sports, so calling, basketball, football, I go back to doing that, but I'd love to get back to a network opportunity. I really love the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Series and the whole IMSA ladder system. Really grown to love it over the last couple of years. It's hard to learn at first, but would love to be a part of that. But yeah, the ultimate dream is to do the Indianapolis 500 on pit road, or call the race, but probably more realistically on pit road. I think that would be something I could do. And I don't know, just every opportunity, make it the best. And because you never know when the next one's going to come. So just going to try to make the most of 2023.
Now, of the interviews you've done, you mentioned your first interview with Stephen Parsons. Has there been any like other interviews that like stick with you, or you call like your favorite?
Yeah, it's always fun. I think whenever you get an opportunity to talk to somebody who's a legend of their sport, and it actually was before I even was labeled as a professional. When I was an intern, I got to do a sit down with Jeff Gordon at an event promoting the Brickyard 400. So that was for that local station. They trusted me to do the sit down, and then they took clips of that interview for their broadcast shows. So that was my all-time racing hero as a kid growing up. Him and Tony Stewart. Of course, looking back, you look at AJ Foyt and Mario, but during my time, it was Jeff Gordon. And so it was cool to sit down with him. And then later, my first professional gig in Texas, promoting the Texas Motor Speedway race, I got to do a 3 or 5 minute sit down with Dale Earnhardt Jr., who, then was the most popular driver, active driver. And it was about 3 years before he retired. So that was cool to get that opportunity before he stepped away from driving full time. And it was, of course, during the concussion battle that he had been battling. So talking in depth about that and hearing his story. Those two stick out. I mean, I think at the racetrack, I really enjoy, people may question, but I really enjoy talking to Kyle Busch, especially because now we have that dirt background and getting to talk to him at the Chili Bowl and the shootout and what his son's doing. So I always love catching up with him and Ross Chastain and some of the other ones that have been really welcoming over the course of my early career still.
Gotcha. Ross Chastain is a really nice guy. I remember I met him in 2019 at the Roval. This is when he drove, I forgot what the team was, but I think he drove the 15 car at the time. And he took time, to talk to his fans and, 5-minute conversations. But
yeah, well, it's a humble background. It's kind of where we come from, right? So
yeah, definitely. Now, speaking of like interactions with people, have you had any like crazy fan interactions with anyone at the track?
Oh, I'm not big time enough to have those kind of fans. No, I think some people, honestly, they recognize me more if I'm at a NASCAR race, or actually, for instance, I was at the airport, a couple weeks ago, and somebody said that, they recognize my voice from the Chili Bowl and the broadcast there. So I get recognized more for that, just based off my voice. It's pretty unique. Yeah. It's not a deep radio voice. It's a little bit higher. So I think people know when I'm on the mic at an IMSA race, like, oh, there's Chris, or, stuff like that. But no crazy fan interactions. I think growing up or in my early career in Texas, when you're the local sports guy in a small town, everybody knows who you are. So I remember going out to eat and having people stare or take pictures of you, but not at this level. No, I'm perfectly cool flying under the radar. I don't need the pomp and circumstance and the promotions. I'm just Chris Wilner, and I'm a fan of race cars, and I get to talk about them for a living, which is cool.
Yeah, now there's a lot of like shows that go on during the week. There's so many podcasts now, different, videos, there's YouTube, there's Spotify and all that. Now you do shows for MRN, you've done interviews for MRN, not only at the track, but sometimes off the track and in Charlotte. And do you listen to any other like shows that go on during the week?
For as little free time as I have, I do sometimes, especially if I'm in the car. They're all racing shows, but I'm a big fan of like Dale Jr. Download and Door Up or Clear. I've listened to a few times. Those guys, Freddie Kraft is a friend of mine, but I've really actually been enjoying the new one from Denny Hamlin, Actions Detrimental. That's a really good one, again, on the Dirty Mo platform. So I listen to all those. Just as entertainment, and always kind of figuring out from the driver's side, especially for Denny's podcast, kind of what they're thinking and their point of view on topics, especially when it gets pretty serious, talking about the TV rights deal that's going to expire at the end of, 24 and things like that. So I listen to those. Of course, I listen to MRN and its shows, of course, my own NASCAR Coast to Coast, talking all things grassroots, but every, Wing Nation as a dirt guy, I love listening to Steve and his guests and Aaron. And so, I try to dabble. I'm not like a dedicated, I listen to every episode, but if I need to, I'll pop one on just to keep tabs on things.
Big Brothers and Big Sisters of Abilene. Can you tell me about that and your involvement with that?
Yeah, so Big Brothers, Big Sisters in Abilene. Of course, Big Brothers, Big Sisters is a huge national organization where you kind of mentor a child, whether they're in need or just in need of some sort of extracurricular activity, maybe to get away from home life, you name it, there's an organization that's there. And they're in a lot of cities across the country, but I didn't realize they're in Abilene until I began down there as a sports anchor. And one of my mentors in Abilene, who helped us out on a sports show, who recently passed away, his name is Mark Rogers, was a big to a little in Abilene. And so I kind of fed off of him and got involved a little bit. They did a Over the Edge program, which you got to rappel off a building in Abilene. They do it down here in Charlotte as well, for a different organization. But we did it basically. I got to go down up a 20-story building, the tallest building in Abilene, and rappel myself down, and I raised money to be able to do that, and it all went to Big Brothers Big Sisters. So my wife was a big as well in Abilene. So I was never one, because just the way my schedule was, I couldn't dedicate the time to have that relationship. But I definitely gave back, in other ways. But to have my then girlfriend at the time be a part of it, it was cool to meet her little and kind of share in that experience.
That's great. And if you haven't yet, I'll put that in the next question I wanted to ask you. It's more about like the production side of the sport. Now, what does a typical race day look like for you as you're preparing and getting ready for a broadcast?
Yeah, so it obviously starts before we even head out to the racetrack or travel. For instance, when we record this, tomorrow I'll be heading out to Las Vegas for the truck race, which will be Friday night. But it's been started this week. We use this tool, which has been great. It's called Racing Insights. They send out a lot of statistical data for each race, a lot of it. And so we kind of decipher through it. At least for me on pit road, I like to look at, to make sure I have nuggets on each driver to kind of figure out what happened in the last race, where they're at in terms of this particular racetrack, who's good here. Some of those big nuggets going into the race, you can kind of figure out those storylines. So kind of get my notes together for that, and then we'll fly out. And then really it starts the race day. We'll have a production meeting with the talent, the producers. Usually it's either at the hotel or when we get to the racetrack, just to kind of go over the format of the show. Each show is formatted the same, minus the cup races, which we have a longer pre-race for. But it's typically run the same format in terms of, who opens the show and how many, interviews we're expecting to have. We'll kind of figure out our targets, because usually by then we'll understand, obviously the qualifying order. So if there's big storylines with somebody who's a championship favorite, or in this case, a name that we expect to be in the championship contention later on this year, maybe doesn't qualify well or has an issue, we would follow up with that. If not, we usually like to interview obviously the front row, and then some of the other storylines, maybe a former winner at the racetrack. Or somebody obviously like Kyle Busch, who's going to be making his first of 5 starts this year in the truck at Vegas. That's his home track, so he's pretty good there too. So I'm sure we'll kind of get a list together of who we're going to talk to, and then after that, it's basically just getting to the racetrack. And the 2 pit reporters will be myself and Kim Kuhn this weekend. We'll be in the media center, just kind of getting everything we need to together. Probably do a couple laps through the garage area, say hi to some folks. I wasn't in Daytona, so this will be my first one for the truck series this year. So it'll be good to catch up with some people that I know, kind of see what the vibe is, and kind of anything late breaking I could find, which sometimes happens, sometimes doesn't. But you like to be prepared. And then basically it's just you get suited up at a certain time with the BSI trailer, which has all of our packs, our microphones and the belt pack and the headset, and head out to pit road about 20 minutes before we're scheduled to be on air. And then we start. And then as soon as the race is over, head back to the BSI trailer, which is usually in the garage area, take that off, give it back to them. And then we usually pile in a car. And for this race, it's a little bit, unique, because it is a West Coast race, and we're done locally, I think about 9:00. So a lot of us have an opportunity to fly home that night. So I'll be on a red eye home Friday after the race and be back in Charlotte early Saturday morning. So not a lot of sleep's going to happen on Friday, but I like to be back home. At least that gives me the whole day Saturday and Sunday before another week.
Gotcha. As you mentioned, there's just a lot of preparation that goes into it, a lot of equipment as well. For those that don't know, I'm a studio operator at DIRTVision. So when I go in there, I make sure I have information. I do research, like with you do research on drivers, stuff like that. I then make sure I have all the files ready, timing, scoring, graphics, and then I talk to the producers at the track. So for example, Millbridge Andrew, one of the producers there. So, it's really fun. The production in the pre-race definitely is fun in my eyes. I enjoy preparing for an event. Now, what is probably one of your favorite parts about traveling on the road? Do you have a favorite thing you have on the road? It's an odd question.
Considering I'm on year 4, so I'm not like burnt out like a lot of people are just yet. Obviously, when you get the course, by the time we get to October, I'm pretty much done. I just enjoy going to places and seeing new facilities. Obviously, a lot of the races I go to now, I've been going for the last couple of years, but there'll be some new tracks. Like for instance, this year on the truck schedule, the Milwaukee Mile. I've watched races on TV there. My buddy Dylan, who we talked about, raced a midget there. I wasn't there, but I've always wanted to see what a race there looked like. So it'd be cool to cover that. Last year, it was IRP when the trucks went back. That's my home short track on the pavement side. I used to go to Carb Night Classic and the night before the 500 there all the time, watching midget races. So cool to be able to work that. But the best part of travel for me, is just to travel to different parts of the country. Can we go to West Coast for IMSA, to go to Monterey, California and do the 17-mile drive and see where, some of the most luscious scenery is in the country. That part excites me. It can get monotonous, going through airports and things like that and being away from home. But I'm young enough that I still enjoy it. I enjoy that part of it. But and then obviously just you build a rapport with people that you work with when you travel because you go out to dinner together. Sometimes you're on the same flights as one another. So you kind of have, and then stories come from travel, remember that one time a rental car stuck in here, those things you remember. And so although some of those aren't great memories at the time, but they're fun to look back now and laugh about. But yeah, I would say that's probably the best part of travel for me is just seeing different parts of the country.
Gotcha. I like to travel as well. I haven't traveled much over the last couple of years. For media wise, other than to like Rockingham and Wilkesboro and Darlington for stock car classics. But yeah, definitely a lot of stories come out of being on a crew. I remember for World Finals this past year at the last night when we were on the front stretch, you're taking pictures of the champions and it just starts downpouring rain and then everyone's trying to get the equipment in the trailer and it's just pouring. Then we all went out to eat afterwards, like the crew. And that was definitely one of my favorite memories from last year. So I was gonna ask you, right? So with IMSA, I'm not too familiar with IMSA as much as I am NASCAR. Some of the races are endurance, right? And then some of them aren't, or is it all endurance?
Yeah, they're split. So the endurance races are going to be your Rolex 24 in January. Coming up in March, in a couple weeks will be the Sebring 12 hours. Then you have the Watkins Glen 6-hour race and Petit Le Mans, which is a 10-hour. So you have 4 main endurance championships. The rest are endurance races where they're 2 hours or about 2 hours and 40 minutes or shorter. So they're the length of a NASCAR race or shorter. And there's championships within a championship. You can win, obviously, the overall IMSA championship in your class, but you can also win the endurance championship if you just run those, or you're the better performer out of those endurance races, you win that championship. Or if you just run the sprint races or the best of the sprint drivers, then you win that chance. So there's really 3 championships, which can obviously make things confusing. Again, if you're an outsider and you've never watched IMSA, it could take a minute because then you're like, wait a minute, there's 5 classes on track at the same time, and, which is chaotic in itself. But yeah, so there's endurance races and sprint championships.
Yeah, there's times I've watched the 24 hours, like the Rolex 24 and then the 24 hours of Le Mans, and like people that may not know, like I've had a couple friends that are like, what's all this on the leaderboard? Like, what's this? Why is there 5 different first places and all this? And I have to explain it to them. So,
well, then some of the races, not all 5 compete.
Yeah.
So, most of the races, there's 5. So there's the new GTP, which is formerly DPI. It's the hybrid, prototypes, which is the new top class. Then you have LMP2, LMP3, GTD Pro, and GTD. Well, there are some GT only races where it's just GTD and GTD Pro, which are going to be like VIR and Lime Rock, kind of the short road courses. And then you've got some where, maybe the LMP2 and LMP3 cars don't go, which is going to be Long Beach. So that's your top class prototypes and then your GT cars. Yes, it's confusing. I get it. And so it's one of those things with IMSA. I'm glad I did the NASCAR Productions role editing before I ever did anything media at track with them, because I felt like I could understand by the 3rd or 4th race, okay, this is how it works. Here's who I need to pay attention to, or what I need to pay attention to, and so forth. Because don't forget, they also have multiple drivers, right?
Yeah.
Doing driver changes, and each driver has to have a minimum drive time, and they keep track of everything because you have an electronic. Basically, when you plug in, when you get in the car, it tells timing and scoring who's in the car, and they can track how much time you've spent driving. So it's crazy. It is the most unique form of motorsports, but it is also some of the most awesome racing I've seen, all year. When you can look at a Lamborghini going up against a Porsche, but then you've got this prototype which is going 25, 30 mile an hour faster, flashing its lights, trying to get through. It's incredible.
It definitely is. Now, what do you think about NASCAR going to Le Mans? Isn't that cool?
Oh, yeah, it's fantastic. I remember they were talking about it on the IMSA side, right before the announcement was made. And we would honestly joke, what if a, next gen cup car would go run the 24-hour at Daytona? And then here we are with they're going to Le Mans. And I think it's really cool anytime you can cross 2 major series or 2 major disciplines of motorsports together. And it just further accelerates the sport and the innovation that went behind the next gen car. And now to see it with actual headlights, which blew my mind, because, a lot of people in NASCAR, if you're new to NASCAR, you think, oh, don't they have headlights? No, those are fake. They're not real. But the next gen car for the Le Mans obviously has working headlights, which is cool. But no, it's cool. And, with the whole next gen car too, trying to get it to be as close to the customer product that you can drive, the Camaro, for instance, for Chevy, it'll be cool to see that now on a global stage take part in a race like the 24-hour Le Mans. So hopefully, if all goes well, and maybe it's something that either another class is entered or something like that, I would love to get to go on behalf of IMSA and go check it out in person, because I think anybody who's a fan of motorsports, the Le Mans, 24-hour Le Mans would be a bucket list item to go see.
And definitely, in Le Mans, that race has been around for a long, long time. Now, with the NASCAR going there, do you know if it's just going to be one car, if they're going to have multiple cars? It's something I've been wondering, like, are they going to have more than just one car going over there?
Yeah, for now, I think it's just one car. They may have a backup car they'll bring, but it's going to be just that Garage 56 entry, Mike Rockenfeller, Jensen Button, Jimmy Johnson, a part of that group. So, and obviously they've been coached by Jordan Taylor, which is really cool. He's a legend when it comes to sports car racing. He and his brother Ricky. So, as far as I'm concerned, it's that one car. Again, could it lead to 2? I don't know, because usually that entry, the Garage 56, is for a single entry. So I don't know if that they'll ever have 2, but it'd be interesting to kind of see how it goes, first of all, this year, and then to kind of see what they can work out in years to come.
Definitely. Now, it's a little bit early in the season, but which drivers have impressed you the most so far in Cup, Xfinity, and Truck?
I think if you start on the Cup side, taking away what happened at Daytona, just because Daytona's Daytona and anything can happen, I've been really impressed with obviously Trackhouse continuing to kind of build where they left off in terms of speed. I mean, we saw Ross Chastain up front most of the day in Fontana. Daniel Suarez had a great drive as well, both, I believe, in the top 10. So you look at the progression of that still kind of quote unquote new team, but there was no fall off, at least as of yet. I think the Fords just in general are strong when it comes to qualifying. And I think a lot of the other teams kind of know that, going into each race weekend. I don't know. It's still kind of early, but I think the people you expect to start the season strong have done so. Obviously, I think at the top of the list though is Kyle Busch. Just in what he's been able to do 2 races in. I mean, he probably could have won all 3 between the Clash and the dual races, Daytona and Fontana. He at least got one of them, but he's not shown any sort of weakness jumping over to a new team. So I think those guys for the Cup side. On the Xfinity side, I've been hugely impressed with Sam Mayer. A good friend of mine, Beth Swanson, just took over as his PR rep this year for Junior Motorsports. And I remember her kind of telling me, watch out for this kid. And I remember he went up front in a few races. He was still relatively young, in his second year over there. But, he was making some veteran moves. And I just went, whoa, this kid's going to pick up a win, I think, this year at some point. Don't know where, don't know when, but I think Sam Mayer is somebody that could certainly impress. And then on the truck side, Daytona didn't go their way, and obviously they didn't run at Fontana, but I'm really excited for Raja Caruth, Daniel Dye, and Nick Sanchez, that ARCA group that made its way up to the Truck Series. I think you can go ahead and, although you count him a rookie, Corey Heim, he's already won a couple times in the Truck Series in his limited starts, so he's going to be somebody in terms of a young gun to watch, but he's already has that kind of race winning mentality. But for somebody coming in fresh, I think it's really cool to see what Raja and Daniel Dye and Nick Sanchez have been able to do. So I think those are kind of the ones that I've been impressed with. Again, Vegas, for the Truck Series, is going to be the first time we're going to see him without kind of that super speedway unknown. So we'll hopefully get a better idea. If anybody can challenge Kyle Busch, or of course now John Hunter and Ross Chastain taking part in that truck race as well.
Awesome. Sam Mayer, he in Junior Motorsports, just really consistent. I mean, even throughout last year, like they always had a car in the top 5 or top 10. And Gregson's now in the Cup Series with the 42. And I know a lot of people don't like that Wendy scheme, but I thought it was pretty cool.
It just made me hungry every time they showed it. I was just ready to go to Wendy's here down the road in Huntersville and go get a cheeseburger, a Baconator or something.
Speaking of Wendy's, I actually got a couple of coupons of that the other day. I was just like, I just saw my desk. But, Dylan Coyle is actually now the PR guy for Chandler Smith, if I'm correct, in Chicago Racing. And he was with the late models on the late models for DIRTVision. So, full circles. But, so as we come to the conclusion here of the podcast today, I just want to say thanks again, Chris, for joining, and it's been a blast. And also, I want to mention real quick, this Saturday is Stock Car Classics return to Rockingham. It's Rockingham Speedway's first open house event of the year. Free admission, free parking. Awesome Legacy Race Series are going to be there as well. So make sure, if you're in the North Carolina area, to come out to that this Saturday, March the 4th. Now, thank you again, Chris, for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it. Make sure for those watching to go follow him on social media and his show. Make sure to check it out. You'll see on the screen or in the description below. Thank you, Chris, so much for coming on today's show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Christian. Appreciate it. And we'll catch up with you down the road. Hopefully get you out at a racetrack here soon.
Yeah, man, I'm looking forward to it. Definitely. We'll see if we cross paths sometime this season. We probably will. So, thank you so much. And for those that watch the end, y'all are the real OGs. And until next time, I'm out. Peace.